sit next to you.
Hello everybody, and really pleased to see you here today. Thank you very. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I booming? It's good. Okay. Yeah. Very pleased to see you. Thank you for coming through the stormy country to get here. Yeah, I'm Nicci Gerrard, and along with Julia, I'm the founder of John's Campaign. And as you were saying, we were going to say how we got here. And I'm actually, maybe Julia will do that, I'm not going to say that. I think I've spoken about that enough. All I'll say is that it began with my father in a war, in a bed, in a ward, in a hospital, a kind of silent, small tragedy. And I think I use too many metaphors. When I talk, I use too many metaphors. When I write, I use too many metaphors. And for John's campaign, I've talked about it being like a little rocket. I've talked about a door being pushed from one side and being pulled from the other, so that kind of it can swing open into a new world of more compassionate care in hospitals. I've talked about lighting little fuses, because after all, Julia and I are just two rather tired middle-aged women with jobs elsewhere who kind of have to go around and make other people, ask other people to kind of implement this campaign that we so passionately believe in. And today I'm also talking about it as like a pebble that we threw into a body of water. So the pebble, I guess the pebble was the death of my father, and the realisation that what has happened to him in hospital when he was alone there, untended by us, abandoned by us, if you want, what happened to him, and the way that he went off his own particular cliff into a kind of radically slowed down dying. That was happening to hundreds and thousands of men and women up and down the country, and it made absolutely no sense not to have a welcome access to carers wherever they were needed. So that was the kind of pebble that was thrown in. And then we have, I'm glad to say, we have rippled out. We started with that very specific story. We've gathered up many other stories. We've reached out beyond hospital wards, into kind of care homes, into places wherever carers are needed. We've also become more specific in a way. So there are some hospitals that welcome carers up to the point where they go into theatre, so that there are kind of ways in which we've become quite detailed in the way that we have a reach. But that wash that was created, those ripples that have gone out from that particular little pebble, it hasn't reached everybody. Actually, I was at a hospital last week, and I asked people that, and people were there not just from hospitals. They were there from the community, they were there from GPs, they were there from outreach. I asked them how many people had heard of John's campaign, and I really thought everyone was going to put up their hands. And I would say about 20 or 30% of people put up their hands. I was quite shocked by this. I thought everybody would know about us in this particular setting, and they didn't. And so there's a way in which that sense of John's campaign spreading out and touching more and more places. Well, it's happening, but not everywhere, and certainly not enough. And it used to be, whenever I used to be asked why this wasn't happening, if I was doing interviews, some people say why it wasn't happening, and the answer that I gave a year or so ago, or 2 years ago, I said it was to do with the difficulty of change. How change is always difficult. Even good change can be painful. The intractability of a system. But I also said it was to do with apathy. I thought that there was a kind of torpor, a kind of built-in torpor. And I don't think that was the right thing to say now. I don't believe that anymore. I think there are always reasons why something like this, which seems so obviously good and sensible and principled and compassionate, doesn't happen, especially in a place like the NHS, where people care. Almost everybody I've met who work in the health system, I would describe as good people who go into it for reasons of compassion, of wanting to help, of wanting to rescue. So it's not apathy, there's something else that gets in the way. And I guess that's one of the things we're here to talk about today. What are the barriers that get in the way of this campaign, which I would insist is so obviously a good thing and a right thing and a way forward and a way to change culture and a way to make people's lives better, patients' lives better, carers' lives better, people in the healthcare system's lives better. Why is it not happening? One of the so I'm just going to say the word that I often say to people when they say, "What is John's campaign?" So what we've often said is, John's campaign asks that the carers of people with dementia should have the same rights as parents of sick children to accompany them when they're in hospital or wherever else they are needed. So that's the kind of basic statement that we say to people. And when I was thinking about challenges and why this hasn't rolled out everywhere, I was thinking about that statement, and there were a few words that I wanted, that I've been kind of pondering on. So one, of course, is the word carer. And I know there's been a lot of work done on what a carer is. I don't really like the word carer. It's got a horrible professionalism about it. I don't know many people who would call themselves carer. And they sometimes learn to use that word in order to access things that they need. But I mean, I never was my father's carer. I was always his daughter, and there were lots of other people as well who weren't his carers, but who were his wives and sons and friends. And together we made a group of people who he needed, who weren't his carers. And I think the word carer, we just need to think about how to use it, because there's a kind of dehumanising of language that goes on when we talk about care in hospital. I mean, actually, I was somewhere recently and we weren't talking about carers, we were talking about patient representatives. And that felt even worse, actually. I definitely wasn't a patient representative. Or the other word that I have a real problem with is the loved one. Because actually, quite often, carers, I mean, I don't know what the word is that I'm struggling for, those people who are called carers or who are called loved ones, they don't always feel very loving. It's like a kind of, there's some kind of hand of Satan placed on, a kind of expectation that they are going to behave in the way that carers should behave. So I kind of want to think more about the word carer, and then actually I want to think more about the word care and what it means. I grew up in a family full of kind of doctors and medical staff, and it seems to me that they all worked in the world of cure. So still, doctors and nurses think about cure, the heroic intervention, the leg that's set, the tumour that's removed, the life that returns to normal, short-term things. You come into hospital, you are made better, and you go back into the world. And that seems to me now a broken model, and especially in the world of mental health, it's a model that just doesn't hold. So cure is kind of Promethean, and care is like Sisyphean. It's like this, there is no end with care. I mean, I suppose the end with care is death. So it's hard to think of a model that includes care as well as cure, and includes carers who aren't called carers and who aren't called patients' representatives. And one of the things that goes alongside that thing about cure and care, about thinking about care, is the notion of time and of duration. So people used to go to hospital more frequently. People go to hospital for a week, that's fine. People go into hospital for weeks and weeks and months and months, and that's where their home almost is. That's where their centre becomes, where home has to follow them. It's a whole different way of thinking about being in a kind of vulnerable place. And then the final thing I've been thinking about, when we talk about rights, the rights of carers, and we always talk about rights, not duty. We never talk about the duty of carers. But when we talk about the word rights, it sounds a bit it's kind of a bit of a blanket assertion. You know, the doors will open and in will come the carers, who shouldn't be called carers, and they will be welcomed. And we very well know that everyone has roles, and that everyone should find out what their boundaries are. And that's all about people who care, and people who work in the health service, and everybody around the patient who needs them, talking to each other and communicating and recognising each other's value. So that's all I'm saying now. I think I've spoken for my allotted 7 to 10 minutes. I want to say really a huge welcome and thank you for coming here today, and I'm just going to really value a kind of collaborative conversation about how we can make this work for everybody and how we can all recognise each other's contributions. Thank you.
Yes, I totally. Can you hear me at the back? Great. Yeah, I totally agree with Nicci. It's fabulous of you to have turned up today, because we, you know, like Nicci said, it's all very well dropping pebbles into ponds, but unless people sort of pick them up and ripple out and they get somewhere, what was the point? And people here today have come from all over the country, including, I keep saying this, but you know, Lorraine has come all the way from Wales, and she points out that actually it's a lot quicker coming up from Wales than it was maybe coming down from, you know, Cheshire or somewhere like that. But thank you all for coming, because for me, I suppose it's been join John's campaign and see the world, because I've had such an interesting time, completely unexpected, going to different places and learning things, and my God, I've had a lot to learn. And so today I'd just like to mention a few of the mental health settings, I'll call them. It's a silly word, but anyway, there we are. Mental health settings that I have visited that have taught me so much, because I have found that this area of our campaign has turned out to be my passion. And I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to explain why. But the first setting that I visited was with Natasha and Paul here down in Worcestershire, and I went to Natasha's elderly patients mental health unit, New Haven and Athlone, and it's both for people living with dementia and people with functional mental illness. And what they didn't know when I turned up was I was absolutely terrified, because I realised that I don't have anymore a real fear of mental health institutions, which is probably shared by other people in the country. So that's why I'm not going to feel. That's why I'm going to say it. And I realised it was partly because the old model of what an old mental health institution used to look like. And when I was not quite 6, my mother was sectioned and taken to one of those red brick, Gothic, what we called loony bins in those days. And it wasn't until much more recently, when we've been doing this campaign and when I've been thinking an awful lot about Mum's situation, and I wrote this book, which is called Beloved Old Age, and it made me realise that not only was there that, which I'd sort of forgotten about, but I remembered where my granny was, when she had what was then called senile dementia, and she was in one of those long, smelly wards where nobody ever had their own clothes, and there were just sort of beds all the way down. And there was, a great sort of, it was an old poor law institution that should have been closed down years ago, but was still being used to house the mentally frail and anybody with dementia and anybody who hadn't really got anywhere else to go and was old. And part of my journey with John's campaign and with caring for my mother, and I've sort of got used to saying I'm a carer, because then people know what I'm likely to bang on about. It is, as Nicci says, a word that only came in the language in about the 1980s. Before that, you didn't even have the word. but so I have learned a lot about that a mental health institution doesn't have to be a scary place. So it was easy, and Natasha might show you a video yesterday, later. It would be easy to think that going down to her place, but then I went to Raj's place, there's Raj, down at the end there, in West London, and I was a bit late, and I got a bit lost, and there were these big, grey, tall, grim buildings, and I keep sort of going into courtyards where there just seem to be sort of dustbins everywhere. It was St Bernard's Hospital, and I'm sorry if I'm maligning it. And I finally made it to Jubilee Ward, and on your tables you'll see a lovely blue carer's welcome for Jubilee Ward. And I found myself with Raj and his colleagues, and they said, it's going to be a bit difficult, doing this John campaign thing, because we're completely segregated, men and women. Where is everybody going to meet? And they weren't going to let anything put them back. They weren't going to say, well, we haven't got beautiful facilities like at New Haven. We've got these goofy old Victorian facilities. I think they're moving somewhere else. I think it's all right to say this. But the kindliness and the determination that they were going to do it, and that was even more heartening than going to Worcester, because they looked at their facilities, they looked at their staff, they looked at their patients, and they thought, we can do this, and we can make a success of this. And when I spoke to Raj earlier this morning, he said the lovely thing about it is it's given the staff more confidence. Natasha in Worcestershire did a big evaluation of what it had been like, and Paul will be able to speak for this, but one of the things that you found was it actually increased staff satisfaction and interest to be welcoming the families of their patients. And this was a big plus, and it was nice to hear it from both those places. I've had some other wonderful travels and learning journeys. When I went up to Cheshire, and I went to the Cheshire Wirral Partnership, where Andrew has come down from today, I then got an impression of the variousness of mental health staff. We were in a nice sort of conferencey place, but there were people working in all different areas of their partnership. And some were absolutely up for the idea. The people who were working in elderly care, dementia, were absolutely up for welcoming the families in. The people who were working in, can't remember what it's called, food disorders, were absolutely, didn't think this was a good idea at all. And I realised then that, of course, staff have all got their different perceptions, and it's not to do with their unwillingness to open the doors. It's because of what they're perceiving as the right course of treatment for their patient. And I thought, yes, this is true. What we actually need, like you said, it's not sort of blanket. We need a sort of a blanket openness, a blanket willingness, a blanket welcome. But then within that, there are so many individuals, everybody with their individual need. Some people who need to get away from their family relationships. They need asylum in the place of safety sense. A lovely person from North East London Foundation Trust at the end there said some of her patients don't want to go home because they found a little refuge in the asylum, which is a good word as well as a bad word. So that's been, I've had wonderful conversations, and today for me is really, I've been very tense. Bertie, my son here, and Leslie and Nadia will all tell, and Nicci will all tell you about an absolute nightmare I've been to deal with over the last few weeks, because I've so wanted this day to happen. I've so wanted us all to come together, because I do feel perfectly certain that we need to reconsider the role of the family member, the friend, the carer in mental health institutions. I also feel very passionate about the need to reconsider our role in care homes as well. And one person I'm very pleased to see here today is Miranda, who looks after my mum in the nursing home where she now lives in Essex. And Miranda's doing her Masters in Mental Health, and so is come along to write an essay afterwards. Because it seems to me that so much of this is about loneliness, and Age UK has done such great work on loneliness. And if you feel that something's going wrong with your mind, you feel that you're living with dementia, and Tracy is going to speak to us about this, and on your tables you'll find some of the souvenirs of my visits. There's a poem from Tracy. There's also a poem from Sue Newson, another carer. If you feel there's something going wrong with your mind, that's a very, very private feeling, and you might feel intensely lonely. If you're in a mental health institution or you've got a mental illness, again, one of your symptoms, one of your feelings is likely to be an intense loneliness. And as we all know, if it's not a lovely occasion like today, if you're in an institution, if you're in a crowd, like you're suddenly living in a crowded ward, you could also feel intensely lonely. So I think my plea is for the triple whammy of the loneliness of dementia, the loneliness of mental illness, the loneliness of being in an institution that is not your home, that those things can be mitigated by a focus on relationships. And it's in fact essential to mitigate them. I once, Nicci was talking about the sort of the intervention role, and somebody said, oh, well, because the reason I moved my mother to the nursing home from where she was living previously, because I thought she was going to be sectioned, and all those childhood fears came flooding back, and I thought, I can't put... And somebody said, it'll be all right, I'll take her in, sort out her meds, and she'd come out again. And somehow that is not adequate. It's not take them in, sort out their meds, and let them out again. It's to do with the concept of recovery. It's to do with renegotiating somebody's life and their relationships. People who have both mental illness and dementia, either they've had mental illness first and they get dementia, or they get dementia and then mental illness is a comorbidity, those people have got a big renegotiation to do, and they can recover. And Tracy is going to show us actually how strong and positive somebody can be when living with dementia. But their families too need to be helped and to recover. I was surprised when I first went to New Haven, and Natasha and her team were all about carer support. And they said, carers need supporting. I thought, I don't need supporting. And then I thought to myself, when I go home after a bad session with Mum, I feel I've been knocked back into childhood, and that's what Sue Newsom's poem is about. And I sit there, and Bertie will tell you, I snap everybody's heads off. I can't describe how I'm feeling. And then I sort of imagine that down there in New Haven, there's somebody like Natasha sitting down in her office on a Monday evening, ready to help me, as well as to help my mum, ready to help us all find a road to recovery and a road to living with the situations that we haven't chosen. So if out of today we come with some good new signposts on our road, and my souvenirs of my travels are scattered all over your table, so I hope you'll take them home with you, then I think we will have done something really valuable, and all the tantrums I've thrown over the last couple of weeks will maybe have been worth it. Thank you very much.